Yeah, so they would say that if anyone walking on the street near the Stanford, they'd poach you and give you $10 million and say do a startup, right?
Yeah.
It's been discussing about doing a startup from 2000 onwards. It's almost 10 years of all talk and no action. We all said, look, we are all in the mid 35s now. We better take a plunge. And that's about the time even a midlife crisis hits you. What does a farmer do from the morning he wakes up? What exactly is milking all about? What's a cow and what's a bull, right? Let's solve the problem and then convert this problem into an Excel sheet and we can make $100 million. So me and my 9 co-founders at that time.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. On this episode, we speak with Ranjith Mukundan, who is one of the founders of Stellapps. Stellapps is a one-stop dairy supply chain digitization platform, and they offer cattle monitoring, milk procurement, and cold chain management services. Ranjith is an experienced entrepreneur. He's been at this for over 10 years. And I talked to him about various facets of the business, from the product side on what it takes to put sensors on cows and what you can do with that data, to the distribution aspect of things, on working with some of these milk farmers and helping them improve their yield and productivity. All of this and more on this wonderful episode. I hope you like it. Hey Ranjith, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. Rohit of Bloom mentioned you in our conversation, and since then, I've really wanted to have you on. I'm really glad that we could make it. And Stellapps is such a fascinating business, and you personally have such an interesting journey. So I'm looking forward to learning all of the nuances of this, right? So let's start with you. Actually, you have an interesting background. You had a corporate career with Wipro for about 15 years. And then, one would say it's not the most conventional transition to what you're doing with Stellapps right now, right?
Yeah.
So how did that shift happen? What prompted that? And, what were some of those new things you experienced that kind of hit you when you moved into this new role as founder of Stellapps?
Yeah. So thanks, Roshan. Thanks for having me here. I watched some of your other shows. It's a great show. I'll make it a point to watch all the 200 odd podcasts. I'll make it a point to watch them and make it part of my library. So thanks for having me here. So I started my career in '96. Started off as an embedded software engineer, out of developing software for folks like Ericsson, Nortel, Nokia, Cisco, and all of that. And then somewhere in 98, 99, in that area, when I was living in the UK and then in the US subsequently, that's the time the valley was abuzz with a lot of these startup things happening, right? The first, pre-Y2K, spike, and the first .com bust that happened in 2000 happened, right when we were at the, peak of several things.
Right. So this was the pets.com era.
Yeah,
basically.
pets.com. And they would say that, so they would say that if anyone walking on the street near the Stanford, they'd, poach you and give you $10 million and say, do a startup, right? Yeah. So that was a joke, going around. So we're like bitten by, that startup thing in 2000. So and me and my other friends who are all from the similar background working on communication stack, we would meet quite often and say, hey, look, the valley is abuzz with so many startups. Why don't we do something, and all that. So so that was a genesis. Right? So we started in 2011. So you can imagine we've been discussing about doing a startup from 2000 onwards. It's almost 10 years of all talk and no action. Right, so we'd be in continuous touch. We'd be keep track of how Skype is a big thing suddenly. How we used to use search engines like InfoSeek and Hotbot and all of that. The pre-Google days.
Alta Vista.
Yeah, Alta Vista and Surfast and all of that. And suddenly there is something called Google, and we start using Google. Hey, look, there's something called a PageRank algorithm. There's something that we could do. Right, we could take on Google. Right, so you're sort of young engineer, so you want to sort of take on Google, as well. So we'd keep discussing, we'd keep talking, and we could only think of, software and technology technology those days, because that's about all the exposure we had. Because we were working on projects like developing a Microsoft live meeting server for Microsoft, helping AT&T launch an app store because they had got beaten quite badly by Apple's app store, because Apple made all the money and the AT&T network could go down. So all our thoughts were around, how do I develop something similar to what a Microsoft did or a Google did or an AT&T, did. Nothing to do with agriculture, nothing to do with cows, nothing to do with, milk, right? So we somewhere in 2011, we all said, look, we are all in the mid-35s now. We better take a plunge. And that's about the time even a midlife crisis hits you. So until then, you've only seen the developed markets, and you sort of made some money. So it's no more about being financially secure, which is important because all of us come from a middle class background. Right. We said, yeah, we can now take a plunge. Right, what we thought about several years ago, what happened in the valley, why don't we do something? And since we're all not just out of college doing a startup, but having had 15 years of experience, we said, let's pick a compelling problem. And what does compelling problem mean? We said it has to be India, because there's always this sort of a yearning to do something in the Indian context, right? It can't be that we always solve first world problems, solve problems of a Microsoft or an Apple or a Google or a telecom company like AT&T. There's enough problems in the Indian context. So me and my 9 co-founders at that time, right, we decided it has to be a compelling problem in the context of something on healthcare or agriculture or telematics to help to solve the pollution problems and all of that, right? So we said, let's build an IoT app store. Because I keep saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we said, we know Apple App Store, we know how Android came through, because the entire Android development happened right under our nose, right? We were like at the thick of things. So we said, let's develop an IoT app store. It used to call M2M those days, machine to machine app store, right? And that's where the company's name is Stellapps, Stellar Applications, right? We looked at Appsary, application nursery. So Appsary, we said, that sounds too kiddish. So literally, so we said, we'll do, Stellapps, and the domain was available. And we said, let's do a broad, IoT, app store. And it should help solve, we want to be the Google of IoT, which means any non-human traffic should come to our platform. Human traffic all goes to Google, Facebook, those days MySpace, Orkut, and a lot of other things. All the non-human traffic should come to our platform. So we looked at various sectors at that time. We looked at healthcare. We spoke to a lot of surgeons to do things like remote patient monitoring, post-surgery, care and all of that. But then at around the same time, one of our friend's uncle was starting a organic dairy. So he said, look, I spend a lot of time in Bangalore. When I'm here, I don't know what happens to my cows and farmers, which is in the village, right. Which is about in a place called Tiptur, which is about 2 hours drive from Bangalore. You guys are all techies. Can you help me solve this problem? We said, yeah, interesting. This is exactly what M2M is supposed to solve. Try to access data where humans can't access it, right? In some cases, in urban scenario, it's your air conditioner, your car and all that. But in urban, rural scenario, it's about cows, animals, and agriculture. So this happened in 2010-11. So me and some of my co-founders spent a lot of time on the farm, understanding what happens on these farms. What does a farmer do from the morning he wakes up? What exactly is milking all about? What's a cow and what's a bull, right? And we started at that level. But from a problem solving point of view, it was very interesting, right? Anything you look at, it was like, there's a lot of thing that tech could help, right? Everything was so manual. Everything was so old fashioned. And being technology guys, everything would be like, hey, this can be automated. Hey, this can be done this way. Hey, this can be recorded in the software. Hey, this can be sent over a cloud and analyzed. Why do I need a veterinary person to come on? Because it's a very simple diagnosis. I can do image processing here. I could do text to voice, text to speech here, right? So everything looked like something that the tech that we had picked up over the last 15 years can be, applied. The problem solving part of our brain would actually get better of us. Almost zero business sense. right? We didn't. The last thing that occurred to us was that we need to also make this, try to see how to make money.
Right.
There is the concept of an investor, and there is a concept of a business plan and unit economics and all of that. That didn't occur to us. It was about let's solve the problem and then convert this problem into an Excel sheet, and we can make $100 million if I could sort of do that. So that's how the entire journey started, right? From my personal background on the embedded engineering side, looking at various other platforms. And around the same time, we were incubated at IIT Madras. So my co-founders were either from IIT Kharagpur or IIT Madras. So Professor Ashok Junjunwala at that time, he's heading the IIT Madras incubation cell. He was Prime Minister's part of Prime Minister's Advisory Council for Agriculture. So he said, hey guys, you can't be looking at multiple sectors, cows in the morning, buses in the evening, and then healthcare. Because the way we modeled our platform was, for us, a cow and a bus is the same thing from an IoT perspective.
Machine to machine.
Machine to machine, right? But then he said, look, to monetize it, you need to get more vertically integrated. You need to get domain focused. Unlike in the Valley or in the US, where people would pay you for the software only component as a broad platform, here you need to sort of so that's where we said, let me drop healthcare. We are actually doing projects with Volvo at that time when we started in 2012, trying to ensure that the drivers are driving properly. We would tap into the OBD2 interface, collect all the data, and then same time the data from an animal would come to say, okay, when is this animal's peak ovulation, so that you can inseminate this animal at the right time. Then we figured that we need to start making a business sense out of it, and then we said, let's drop all the healthcare, education. Let's focus only on agri. And dairy seems large enough. It's a large area. I don't know if you know, Roshan, it's 7.6% of our GDP is milk. Wow. It's a $250 billion industry if you consider the pre and post harvest. So we didn't have to look too further for saying, okay, what's my total addressable market? If I'm just able to solve it for milk, 7.5% of our GDP is that. It's a big enough problem, and that's when we sort of started getting more deeper into dairy, and that's how the whole journey started. So a long-winded answer. I had to cover.
It gives a lot of context for sure. Right, and I think it's so there are two categories, right? Either the market picks you or you pick the market. In the first category, I mean, it's a typical you experience a problem, you build a solution, you learn to build a business around that. But in your case, right, I mean, you actually studied the potential for how tech can disrupt a market, right, and picked something. Now, I wanted to take a step back and talk about what were some of the principles you had in mind in terms of picking that market, right? Because you looked at healthcare, you were working with buses, right? Then you looked at dairy. Why did you pick dairy over all of these? What were some principles, guidelines, guardrails, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, we were looking at buses in the morning, cows in the evening type of a scenario when we started. But some things that appeared to us quite intriguing was that from a tech perspective, since we were all bitten by M2M and IoT and all of that, right? We felt that the best application for an M2M is the sheer remoteness of the problem, right? What I mean by that is the cows are in the remote villages, and your data centers and cloud is hosted somewhere else, and it's not possibly practical for you to chase and run behind every cow and capture data, right? So M2M is all about the remoteness, right? Inaccessibility, and how do you solve for the remoteness, number one. Number two, the analytics. So things like ChatGPT are not even nowhere close those days, but the analytics, right, on the cloud could be a reasonable substitute for lack of expertise on the ground. What I mean by that is most of the veterinary doctors would leave these villages and start pet clinics in the cities. And then there's no expertise available in the villages, right? So we knew that the analytics and expert systems and algorithms that you can build on the ground can be a reasonable substitute for lack of expertise in premise, right? And IoT is supposed to solve this problem. Like if you want to turn on your AC in the car, if you had a driver, you would call him and say that, look, I'm coming, you turn on the AC and keep it. But IoT, you would sort of just message your car, and the AC would start so that when you sit, it's at the right temperature, right? So from a problem perspective, from an IoT and M2M perspective, more than anything else, this seemed to be the right fit. That's sort of number one, right? Number two, we also figured that in agriculture, people are willing to put money on the table and talk, right, from a customer point of view. I remember doing in the IIT Madras campus, Professor Ashok had organized a session where all the prominent surgeons from Chennai turned up, and we were pitching to them saying that this is how this is like 2012, right? This is how telemedicine would work. Well before COVID, right? Maybe post COVID, that pitch would have meant it would have been much more easier. So we were making the pitch to all the doctors and surgeons, and almost invariably all of them said, what you're saying will not work, right? I'd like to see the patient in person. I'd like to, even the young ones in 40s and all that, surgeons, right? They would say, this remote patient care and all that, I don't think will work. On the other hand, on the agri side, one would imagine that they wouldn't take technology. Anyone who spoke to, they say, hey, I like that. If you can make it work, I'm willing to pay for it. So we figured that a more evolved area like healthcare is not where you have people like surgeons and doctors. They wouldn't want to experiment with tech because they felt that human component is very important. Whereas on the agriculture, to our surprise, we figured that people are saying, hey, look, I'll give you a purchase order tomorrow if you can automate my farm. Right, I know you guys are techies, you can do it. I have a labor problem at the farm. Can you sort of automate the farm? So then that was a second check, right? First, from a problem solving and the application of IoT and M2M, it seems to be a really good problem. The remoteness, lack of expertise and all that. Because we felt that in urban scenario, you still have access to people. There's someone at home to turn on the AC. There's a driver. It's not as compelling. Whereas in the villages, you know the go, right? You know the go to manage your animals. You know the go to put more veterinary doctors in the villages because they all migrated to the towns. So from a compelling nature point of view, it was much more compelling application of IoT. And two, as I said, people are customer, right? As a problem solver, it's good to know that people are willing to pay some money for the problems you're willing to solve. So it's a real vindication of, okay, it's a valid problem. So these are the two things that tilted more in favor of agriculture, dairy, vis-a-vis telematics or vis-a-vis healthcare.
The other insight that I found interesting and that I've seen personally as well is that, you can't build software for software's sake, right? Indians hate paying for software. I mean, that is changing.
Absolutely. I can't agree more with you. Yeah.
I mean, I have some battle scars as well. So, Indians hate paying for software, and that could be changing, but you really have to build out the use case, right? And that obviously influenced your decision to like dig deep and go into a domain, learn up about everything, and then really focus on the end results, right? And not just say that, hey, here is some tech, you can go and manage whatever you want with this, right? And I think that's also like that's also a stumbling block I think a lot of young entrepreneurs kind of make, right? They build this cool new technology which does something, and then they sell the technology instead of the outcome or the use case.
Exactly. So I mean, I rightly said, even we started with a software only approach, right? Because I really wish, as you said, if people would pay for the software or a SaaS and value-based model, and we soon realized that's not going to happen. That was the first insight. Hey, look, our core is hardcore software analytics, and people would ask, how many Java engineers do you have? And hence, I'll pay according to how many engineers you have, right? It's not like for the value. So one of the things that we did was we were not shy to touch the hardware, right? So one of my co-founders, Praveen, he comes from a VLSI design background as well. So we said, look, if when you're trying to solve the problem end to end in a use case driven approach, and you can't just solve it in the software and data realm, I need a hardware as well.
There's that saying, right? I mean, if you want to build really good software, you have to have your own hardware as well.
Exactly. Right. So we said, look, for example, we wanted to monitor animals. We wanted to have a Fitbit for the animals. That's one of the components we have. It goes around the animal's leg, right? We said, look, all of the Fitbits that Europe and US has is about $150 to $200. It's not going to work for the unit economics of an Indian farmer who's only earning about $20, $30 a month, right? Or even lesser. So we said, let's design one ourselves. It doesn't look too complicated. We know VLSI design. And let's build this hardware. Otherwise, I need a hardware monitoring component as well. So we also said, let's not be shy to touch hardware. And when we realized that hardware could be a taboo when we started raising funds, where there'd be investors who would say, oh, you have a hardware, that's too complicated. I thought you guys are only software, right? We said, no, I mean, you need a combination, to solve. And so we decided to also, not dabble around with infrastructure, dabble around with electronics and all of that. So our end-to-end solution would need a civil engineering expertise, because when you go mount things in a farm, it needs to fit into the farm civil aspects. Things like a simple scientifically managed cow shed. How do you do it like a Lego block? Electronics, some mechanical stuff. Cold chain milk is the most perishable crop, so you need to know how to sort of cold chain it. So we said, maybe in retrospect, I think we took on too many things, right? We didn't care about its software, mechanical, civil. We just said, let's solve the problem. Maybe had we been wiser, we would have been little more, we'd have drawn the boundary more quickly. But at that time, it was sheer enthusiasm. We said, no, the problem has to be cracked. Let's go all out and sort of solve it. So for us, though we started off with a definition of tech as if it's a software, we realized soon it can't be just software and data. It can't be an app on a smartphone alone. It has to be a whole slew of electronics, data, mechanical, because at every step there's a hurdle that we need to cross, and for that I just can't cross the hurdle with software. I needed some mechanical engineering component. I need some electronics, VLSI design. So we said, let's take a solutioning approach. Let's take a use case driven approach and see whatever it takes to solve that problem. And hence we went well beyond software. Though we start off as technology, now our definition of technology is not just software. That's one component of it. It has a liberal dose of hardware and all of it, because the solution warrants it, right? Because it's such an old supply chain, Roshan. It's like several centuries old, and no one has ever tried to modernize it. Like our banking is modernized, it's all online. Our agriculture, no one has even attempted modernizing it. So had all of that supply chain been online, I would have probably tried to solve the problem only in software. We realized that it's such an offline system. The first step is to bring it online, and for that I need hardware. And then I'll start solving it in the software realm.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that you have to take a full stack approach when you're talking about some of these things. IoT, for instance, right? I mean, there are no standards that have evolved. I mean, of course, now maybe
now it might be there,
changed, right? But around that time, when you're building applications, you take a few things for granted, right? The infrastructure, the security, and so on and so forth.
Correct.
Nobody is doing all of those things.
Exactly.
And they're building at the application level.
Correct.
But I mean, I can quite imagine.
And a good analogy, right? In the telecom sector where I started my career, all the basic infra was in place, right? The basic switching systems, communication, broadband. You're trying to solve the problem for apps at a software layer.
Correct.
So you sort of try to retrofit that into an agri system, right? It was like nothing there, right? It's like a ground and all analog systems. And then you sort of need to bring it to a level where the data comes online, and then you start solving the problem at the data layer. So exactly the experience we went through.
Now, when you look at an unorganized sector like agriculture, right, and there are plethora of problems that you can solve, right? Agriculture, famously 40% of our population is employed, right, contributes way less in terms of proportion to GDP and so on. Right. And, you could make the case for technology, right?
Absolutely.
That, you can improve yield and productivity.
Correct.
You can increase market access. You can streamline supply chain.
Absolutely.
Really, I mean, there are like maybe
you just touch it, there's a problem that needs to be solved.
There are 1,000 problems to solve, right? But at the same time, I feel like over the last 3 years, what we've seen is like a hype in terms of, agri-tech is the next big thing, to sort of a tapering down and a more like a rationalization of things, right? Saying that, hey, it is not as, well, certainly the problems are hard and complex and worth solving, but it's not easy to solve those. Right? So what do you think people get wrong about it? What are we all understand the opportunities, but what are some of the hard challenges that founders kind of encounter when they look at this sector?
So as you rightly said, it follows the famous Gartner curve, right? It goes to the hype and then falls, and then they have a good nomenclature to explain that. So I think AgTech is probably going through that, right? It sort of peaked because when we started, the term AgTech didn't exist. This is like 2010, 11, right? And then you had very few in India, probably Omnivore was the only agtech fund at that time, and they're one of our investors and one of our most staunch supporters. And then you had incubators like IIT Madras, where someone like a Professor Ashok Junjunwala would take a bet on, yes, it's a problem that needs to be solved, right? And it, as you said, I think the trigger for that hype cycle was when SoftBank invested in a company called Plenty in the US. It's a $200 million investment, because anything that SoftBank or Tiger does, it's in that caliber, right? It's $100-200 million. So, and Plenty was sort of about vertical, gardening, right? And suddenly someone in agriculture got a $200 million check, right? And then it started getting slowly mainstream. Then you had all the mainstream investors also sit back and say, "Hey, look, if SoftBank is betting on something, this is an interesting problem. Human beings do need to consume food, so there must be something in it, because agriculture is eventually feeding into the food ecosystem." But it's a long haul, okay? So when there are easier use cases, right? If I take a very investment-friendly view, I would sort of pick an urban use case, because the purchasing power is higher. The unit economics is easier to build relatively. Competition can be high, but you can build a business plan a little more effectively from an ROCE perspective or from a unit economics perspective in an urban use case. In the context of a 5-year fund life, right? Majority of the investors have a 5 to 6 year fund life, but agriculture spans across multiple fund lives. You just can't crack it within in a big way within a 5-year time span, because it's such a big, mammoth, old-fashioned component. It needs a little bit of rigor to sort of solve it. That's why I like Bloom Fund's concept of the effect of compounding. Right? You need to chip away at it over a period of a decade, and then it starts humming into a well-oiled machine. So one thing is, it needs enough time. It can't be solved at scale. Right. Others, you have to be too niche, right? I just take one small component and solve it. But then if you want to solve something at scale in the agri and rural space, give it 10 years, right? 10 years to sort of, this is from the time when we started. Maybe now with a lot more know-how, it probably takes a shorter duration. But one is give enough time, number one. Number two, as we discussed in the previous part, right? Don't try to solve it only in the software layer. You just need to take a solutioning approach, because it's not like a mature industry, as you said, where all the base layers are taken care of and you can step back and say, okay, I can just solve it in the software and data layer. You might have to touch other parts. Right. And the third part is the business modeling is quite complex. Right. Vis-a-vis a straightforward SaaS-based model, which you could sort of define it using LTV, CAC, and all of that, right? I mean, those basic hygiene apart, in ag, there are so many other things. How do you manage the commodity risks? How do you manage the inventory risks? How do you manage the various, because it's still under the effect of the weather, right? You've seen what's happening in Chennai and surrounding areas. Agri gets impacted, right? So apart from all the other problems that a typical SaaS company needs to keep a tab on, there are a bunch of other things that feed into your business model. Now probably there are enough companies out there. Investors have burnt the finger, as you said, hype and down. Maybe there are some playbooks that you can learn from. But when we started, there was no playbook, right? We didn't know how do I fit it into the scheme of a SaaS-based unit economics? How do I fit it into the scheme of an IoT-based unit economics? It didn't fit, right? So we had to step back and learn a little bit on, okay, how do you make it fit into a scalable business model? How do I factor in for the inventory risks? Because when there is supply glut, when heavy rains happen, otherwise there is dearth of supply. So we had to sort of make a blend of the two. It has to have all the tech as an enabler component built in, plus all the other business models. So these are three things that I think I would let people be very wary of, right? A traditional, typical business modeling approach may not work. You need to step back and look at what fits into that. Two, don't just look at a software-only approach, right? And three, give it at least 10 years to solve it at scale. These are things that jump to my mind when you ask a question.
Right. Yeah. And I think in such contrast to typical software businesses, right, where you fail fast, iterate quickly, learn, pivot, do whatever it takes to go from like MVP to a legit product in a matter of a few, if not months, I mean a couple of years or whatever it is, right, to get to PMF as such. And here I think the concept of a PMF is such an evolving sort of thing, right? And especially
had there been a playbook, one would have used that. Right? For example, the software world, look at Zoho or a Freshworks or one of them. So on the enterprise or MSME software space, there is a playbook now. So I would sort of stand on the shoulders of those giants and build forward from there. Whereas in agri, we didn't have any playbooks, right? And hence what you said, step back and figure out what's the PMF, how do you make that work in our context. Even the business modeling, because coming from the Wipro telecom background, our first Excel sheet are very, very SaaS software, kind of a model. X units, this is the unit economics, and hey, this should work. Right? Then we figured that, this is far too simple.
Simple things like, once you do the modeling, I mean, once you do the like end to end, you realize how much your margins are hit by all the vagaries that you mentioned. Right?
Exactly.
And if you have to factor all of those things.
Exactly.
The most tragic thing would be to like build a compelling solution, but be left with very little at the end to go around.
Yeah, right? we get that feeling all the time. Yeah.
So we've spoken about the market. Let's talk about the founding itself, right? How did you go from idea to product to company? You mentioned you have 9 co-founders. Right?
That's very unusual.
That's some kind of a record. I mean,
we had 9, by the way. So we always draw some consolation from the fact that, hey, that's abnormal. We say, hey, look, Infi to add a line. Co-founders.
So we've had, I think, 7 co-founders before on the podcast.
Okay, this is the highest.
Right. So this beats all of them.
So you need to give me a trophy as I walk out.
So how did that happen, and how do you manage to get some kind of consensus, and how do you manage to make decision making fast and quick with 9 people? So how do you go from this, okay, now here's a market we want to operate, this is a product we want to build, and hey, here is a business and we have all these people. So how do you do that journey?
So we are 1/3 of the founding size now. We are about 3 co-founders from the time when we started. But the idea was, when I was running a practice called Value Added Services Practice at Wipro, and all the other 8 folks were part of my team. So the idea was, when I decided to step out, the team who I was very close with, right? So they said, we'd like to be part of this kind of a journey as well, because we're also kicked about technology, trying to solve a compelling problem. So we said, why not? Let's more heads the better. So the 9 of us, got started on that journey. We're still in touch, very amicable. We not had any acrimonious fallout or anything, right? But over time, some of the individual financial constraints also kick in, right? Not everyone have the same appetite for risk, do not have the same family backing, right? So so slowly, someone would say, look, it's been 2 years now. My dad is saying, look, I need to increase, because we're all working for the first couple of years. We're working almost on 0 salary, right? Whatever savings we had. And then once we got seed funding, we said we'll take some, 15,000 home, right? And for some of us it was okay, but for some of us it was like, no, my dad, my family wants me to get back to more regular stuff. So slowly, depending on the personal appetite, people said, look, I would like to sign off. You guys continue. I'll continue to support you guys in whatever manner. Some of them went back to the US. They're settled there. Some of them went back to the corporate world, started working on other technology companies and all of that. So that's how it became. We started off saying that we need enough more brains, a lot of tech, and all of it. So today, as we speak, we are 3 co-founders. But along the way, decision making was always tough. So the first thing that we did when we got started was we put together a governance model, right? And we said, look, this is how the decision making structure is going to be. And since I was always in a decision making place vis-a-vis the other 8 co-founders, even in my earlier job, so that made things a little easier. So I could take a final call on some of those things.
Right.
but all the 8 of them are highly intellectually driven, highly opinionated. So it's never easy, right? So when you have a problem saying, should we start solving for animal, peak estrus management versus real-time milk measurement, we would debate for 10 hours and then come out with all the solutions. So it was never the slickest and fastest way of decision making. But the upside is when the decision is made, it's probably the best in that context.
Most
because you're right. It might have taken a day more, and all of us would invariably always night out and pull all-nighters to come out with a solution. So we might have started at 4 p.m. on a topic, and we're like sitting and cranking away at it at 4 a.m. Right. So that way, it might have taken a little longer, but what eventually came out from some of those calls were probably better outcomes. But I wouldn't. It's very contextual. I wouldn't always recommend it one way or the other. It just really fits, circumstantially what works in a context. Quick decision making is always, really important. More than half the time you might be wrong, but you just need to hope that at least half of the time you're right. So that way, I think decision making is probably very critical. Have governance models in place, decide fast, and it's not like you decide fast in all scenarios. In some cases, taking an extra couple of days is okay, but in some other case, when you're sitting and negotiating with a customer, and you need to drop prices to win that, you can't say, look, I'll come back within an hour and tell you, right?
Yeah.
In that case, you need to take a call, right? You take a call in that call. In other case where you're sitting and working out the architecture, you don't have to do it in a few hours. You take your time, come back with an architecture. But broadly, that fail fast that you said, the way I would read that book and that philosophy is take decisions faster, and fast is very relative. In the context of agri, in our case, it's different. In the context of a consumer-facing business, an FMCG or any other consumer acquisition business, it's a little different. So contextualize those. But I think the thumb rule is be able to take decisions fast enough depending on the context. And having founders helps. 3 co-founders, 4 co-founders help, because you need that support system around you, right? Yeah. It can't be like a 1 or 1 is too less, right? Yeah. 9 might be too many. But I think 3 to 4 co-founders is a good size for us to get to scale.
You can't think through everything, basically.
Exactly. There'll be blind spot. Right? Absolutely.
So it really helps to have people looking at it from different
angles.
And one of the things that, so I was just listening to the Bloom interview with Manish Sabharwal, and he says you have to have people around you who kind of slow you down. I had to listen to that 2 or 3 times to understand really what he's trying to say, because oftentimes I think you feel like every idea you have is the next best thing, right? But then you need to have people around you who kind of slow you down.
Very good point. That's an excellent point, because depending on the personality type that we are, right? We will have blind spots, right? And you might be very operationally detail-oriented person, whereas I might be someone who's looking at only the innovative component. But for the business to succeed, you need both. So that's an absolutely good way to put it. You need people who can slow you down.
Right.
Otherwise, you keep taking more and more interesting steps in the wrong direction, right? Which is not the right thing. So that's I saw that in a podcast. It's a really well done and well articulated podcast.
Right. So we've touched upon some aspects of it, but just quick facts, right? What does Stellapps do? Who are your customers? What are some of the common use cases you serve?
So at a very broad level, it's a very simple narrative. Okay, what we're trying to do is build out a digital food value chain platform. That's all we do, digital food value chain platform. But when you break it down, it looks like there are a lot of cows, animals, and milk to it. So on one end of the platform, there are farmers, because at the end of the day, when you say food, the food is invariably produced by the farmers. Of course, today there are a lot of lab-grown meat, lab-grown milk and all that. That's still in its infancy and catching on in places like the US, right? So on one end of the food value chain platform, you have the farmer. And on the other end, you have the consumer, like you and I, right? Consumers need good quality, traceable, antibiotic-free, fresh food, so that it serves the right purpose, right? And you better be sure what you're having or what your loved ones are having is safe from various angles. Today, traditional food, if you actually put it under the microscope, it's not a very happy story. There's in terms of the bacterial load, in terms of a lot of things that sort of go in. And for the farmer, who's at the crux of this entire thing, how do you sort of also? He's the most important stakeholder, right? If all of the farmers live the villages and come to Bangalore, then we can't grow vertically the food that we need. So how do you ensure that these two key stakeholders, the farmer and the consumer, their services and their requirements are met through this food value chain platform? That's broadly what we're doing. In the food value chain platform, we applied it to milk as a first use case, because milk happens to be a daily velocity agri produce. If you look at milk as a crop, it's probably the largest crop on the planet. It's probably the most perishable crop on the planet. It's not your fish, it's not meat, it's not your tomatoes, it's milk that would perish, right? So from that point of view, the idea was, if I solve this problem in a compelling fashion for milk, which itself is large, as I said, a $250 billion market in India, if you take the pre-harvest and post-harvest, then you could potentially extend it to other, agri, produce, as well, right? So our endeavor has been to build out this food value chain platform with productivity, quality, and traceability as three key pillars to solve for. You also mentioned it, that everyone is trying to increase yield and all that, right? Food value chain platform, solve for PQT, productivity, quality, and traceability, keeping these two stakeholders in mind, farmer and consumer, their requirements in mind, right? So that's broadly what we're building out. Right. Who are our customers? Our customers are FMCG companies who would like to launch dairy as a category. Customers like Amazon Fresh, ITC, Unilever. For example, we supply the milk that Unilever uses in its Horlicks and Boost. I think some of us have grown up, have had that. It's a significant portion of that is milk, right? But then can you give carbon efficient milk? Can you give milk to Unilever that is procured in a fair trade manner? Because the farmers get manipulated quite a bit. So you can't, sitting here in Bangalore, we'd have a cup of cappuccino, but the milk that was produced in a non-exploitative manner, because you don't have visibility, you don't have IoT to tell you this was done in a very proper fair trade manner, right? So our customers are FMCG companies who would like to launch their own private label products, right? Tomorrow, if you pick up an Amazon Fresh Paneer from Amazon, we'd like to be the one who's actually manufacturing and selling it, to them. So that's our primary, customer. But along the line, since farmers are on a platform, we also sell a lot of inputs and advisories and services to the farmers. We sell insurance, financial services. But those, I would say, are the ancillary components, because to make farmers loyal and sticky onto your platform, I just can't have a trading relationship with a platform. I buy something and say, hey, I'm done. Trading should be an incidental output when you're dealing with the farmer. It can't be the primary thing. I can't just buy tomatoes and just deal it. I need to ensure that farmers are getting financial services. Farmers are getting insurance services. How do I shift the farmer's orbit from being a smallholder, backyard, hobby-style farmer to more entrepreneurial farmer? Otherwise, it's going to be a lose-lose supply chain. It's going to be a lose-lose value chain. The farmers are always going to churn out. They also look at you very tactically, right? Whoever is paying the highest, that they will sell it to them. But if they know that you are an institution there to help them also handle them to the journey from being a backyard hobby-style farmer to a more entrepreneurial farmer, then they would have a more long-term stickiness with you. They will actually follow your protocols better, which makes your supply chain run more efficiently. So these are the two sets of customers: FMCG companies who would actually want to launch their own private label products, farmers who need these services so that they can graduate from a smallholder farmer to a more entrepreneurial farmer, by solving for productivity, quality, and traceability in the supply chain through this food value chain platform. That's roughly what we do and who we serve.
Right. And just to clarify, right, here, when you work with these FMCG companies, you actually help them with procurement
and manufacturing, right? So, for example, if you'd like to launch a startup operator cheese tomorrow, right, and give it all.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly, right. So you don't have to worry about, how do I manufacture it, right? If you are a good connoisseur and if you taste a good cheese, this is how cheese needs to taste. tomorrow I can give that to you in your label at your office tomorrow, right? And then you can start marketing it. And people like FMCG companies love that. So it's not only the procurement piece, which is the farmer touching. How do you also convert the procured milk into manufactured products?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we all consume milk in various forms: paneer, dahi, chas, kova. I don't know if you know, even sweets like gulab jamun, 40%. Or I think 40-50% of it is milk base. Right? When you walk into Adyar Anand Bhavan, A to B, or Anand Sweets, or Kanti Sweets, majority of the sweets are 80% is sweet base, right?
So if you cancel milk and ghee from Indian sweets, I think there's probably like 3 left.
Exactly, right? That's a good general knowledge question. Which are the sweets that will not touch milk? So the idea is to help these FMCG companies, the Unilevers, and for them it's a really good thing, right? For them it's like, if I built a brand like Ashirwad brand, like ITC has, which is a pan-India brand, maybe all of us are familiar with Ashirwad Atta and all that, right? Why is it that we don't get Ashirwad milk, paneer, cheese, right? It's a $1 billion brand, right? And I'm sure that if someone is buying an Ashirwad Atta, they'll also buy an Ashirwad paneer, because you go by the brand and the trust that you have on the brand, right? So the idea is to enable these brands who hitherto could not launch these because they don't know how to connect with the farmer. How do I monitor? What tech is needed? We're saying that we are that platform. You focus on consumer acquisition. And I must admit, for us, the inspiration behind this kind of business modeling was also what we saw in the telecom network, right? The telecom network, what we saw, especially in India, it's a low ARPU market, low average revenue per user, right? We figured that people like Airtel and Vodafone, they also sort of a consumer-facing B2C CPG company, and the network and IT is run by Ericsson and IBM respectively, for both Vodafone and Airtel. So the entire network. So whenever you and I make a call or download some data, some portion of that revenue goes back to Ericsson. Some portion of the revenue goes back to IBM, right? So which means that Airtel is a front-end company. They know how to play good-looking A.R. Rahman music, acquire consumers, which is one skill. And for us, we felt that from a ROCE perspective, a consumer-facing company, which there are really big guys there today, Reliance Retail, Tata acquired, Big Basket, Amazon Fresh, Unilever, and Procter & Gamble. So we felt that these guys with big pockets are so good at acquiring consumers, so good at building scalable brands. Right? Let me be their technology provider, running operations for them at scale. So for us, technology and operations go hand in hand. To be able to run operations at scale, you need a lot of tech. You couldn't possibly manage a 1 million fleet of Uber without tech, right? It would only be a Ganesh Travels otherwise, 50 drivers calling and managing, right? So same way for us to manage this food platform as a pan-India basis, so that when an ITC or an Unilever says, look, I'd like to turn on my new milk paneer or new Horlicks equivalent or new breakfast in a bottle in the top 10 cities, they could do it overnight because we have sorted out how to become the backward integrated demand fulfillment partner.
Right. In this whole component, right, the supply chain element is very crucial, right? And I don't know, I mean, I saw this crazy stat sometime back that nearly 40 or 50% of the food we produce is wasted, right? And as you said, either there's a glut or there's a scarcity, right?
Exactly.
It's never like,
Correct.
optimal.
It's never demand backwards.
Never a case where demand matches supply. Ever,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And in your case, it's a cold supply chain as well, right? So which means that you have to preserve, the milk.
It's the most precarious supply chain because of the perishable nature. Yeah.
So that's an opportunity and a challenge that presents for you, right?
Yeah.
So when you looked at it, I mean, what are few of the innovations that you did on that front?
Yeah. So we had to do several. As you rightly said, the challenges were aplenty. One, as I said, if I'm supposed to give you a brand of cheese, right? The input quality of milk matters a lot in the final output. If the paneer has to melt in your mouth, the input quality matters. That's when Bangalore never get very good paneer. It almost feels like rubber, and the gravy never gets to the heart of the paneer because of other issues, right? Because the milk that went into it is not that great. Same thing with your yogurt and your probiotics and all of that, right? If your milk is high in residue, a probiotic culture will not grow very actively. Right, so it could be a Greek yogurt or whatever. So the input quality, matters a lot. So one of the things is to ensure that you have come up with really good testing regimes. Some tests you do it at the farm, some tests you do it at the milk collection center. It's a highly fragmented supply chain. Some tests you do at the cold chain, so that and farmers don't add things because they're very mischievous. It sort of gets into it inadvertently, right? Because you're adding something to the fodder, like a urea, and you feed urea to the animals, and it sort of reflects in the milk. Same thing with things like complicated things like aflatoxin and all that. It's sort of fed to the plant, but it reflects in the milk. So you need a lot of farmer education to ensure that they don't do those practices. You follow scientific practice. The innovations we did were things like IoT-based testing across the supply chain, IoT-based grading and pricing to incentivize farmers so that they can convert milk into money in real time. Right, we actually trademarked things like Mucoin and things like that, right? So that literally when farmer walks in with this pail of milk, our IoT device, which is a combination of ultrasonic sensors, cloud, and wireless devices from Qualcomm. Qualcomm happens to be one of our investors as well. So that contraption will help you grade and price the milk in real time, so that when farmers are paid, they know they're getting a given price because it's being graded and prices based on quality. And over time, they would asymptotically move towards better quality production, because they know if I do 1 inch better, I get paid better because my neighbor got paid
the
better.
incentives are aligned.
Exactly, right. And then on the farm side today, we collect about 150 parameters of the animal, the milk, and the farm and the farmer. That's a mind-boggling amount of data per farm.
Yeah.
And to think there are 80 million such farms in India, right? And that data again helps us do things like, do a recommendation engine that will tell you which farmers, which animal needs what kind of nutrition at what point in time. Because our farmers can't afford to buy a lot of nutrition.
How are you delivering some of these insights to the farmers? I mean, is it on the smartphone or?
Combination. Yeah, it's a combination, because when we started, smartphone penetration was very low. I mean, this is 2010-11. So a lot of our interaction was through an SMS or through a local entrepreneur in the village whom we would nominate as a milk collection center operator. So he's not on our rolls, but he would follow our protocol, and he's incentivized to follow our protocol, improve milk productivity and all of that, right? So when we started, it was a combination of SMS plus that manual operator. Now, at least every family has a smartphone in the villages, thanks to Reliance Jio, thanks to the government push, thanks to Aadhaar and all of that. Every family, in South it's much better. Almost every adult has a smartphone today. But if you go up north in UP, Bihar, where we operate, at least every family has a smartphone. And COVID has accelerated some of these things. So today, we push this data over our WhatsApp interfaces, over farmer-facing video snippets. Still, feature phones is still part of our channel, because good percentage of them still use, slightly older farmers still use feature phones, so not used to that touch-based interface. And more importantly, the other stakeholders in the value chain. This includes people like the collection center operator whom I mentioned, the veterinary doctor, paravet, who are slightly more progressive. They become the physical interface as well, right? Who sort of reiterate and drive home that point. So an advisory that's meant for you might actually go to a guy whom you interact with, and he would then tell you, hey, look, Roshan, you need to be doing this, right? And he's actually reading off from a cheat sheet, right? That has come as a WhatsApp message saying that, okay, when this guy comes, I need to tell this, because you might not have the wherewithal to interpret, that message, right?
Yeah, that's the other key thing, right? Which is that pushing for adoption is more complex than sending a few notifications.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You might have to have some kind of community structure.
Yeah.
You might have to incentivize these evangelists.
Exactly.
And have these guys really
Yeah.
talk about this in a non-scary way to some of these folks.
Absolutely.
Right? Because anything new, I mean, especially
Doesn't get
agriculture,
adopted.
farming,
Exactly.
I mean, they've
It's a
been
very
doing this
orthodox,
for hundreds, if
platform.
not thousands of years.
Correct.
Right? So you're sort of disrupting some kind of tradition in some way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and adoption is, in fact, that's why internally, even today, we have a team called as Transformation and Change Management Team, right? And you'll be surprised, it's not only the farmers, the veterinary doctors, and the paravets who take a little time to move from a very traditional paper-based, intuition-based approach to a more data-driven approach. even the larger cooperatives who license our technology, right, to sort of digitize their own value chains, even they're very averse to using. He'll say, no, my this paper and pen is enough. I don't need any analytics and cloud and all that, right? So our change management and transformation team, their entire mandate was, how do I improve the adoption? How do I identify that first mover? Like in the farmer context, the way it works is, the minute you have a model farmer in a village, we identify a model farmer who's relatively more progressive. We get him to set up a farm as per our protocols, scientifically complete tech driven. And that farm sort of becomes like a pilgrimage farm, where every other farmer from neighboring villages start visiting him. And then they say, hey, looks like if that he can do it. He was a smallholder, 2 to 3 animal farmer, and suddenly he's making net 1 lakh rupee per month as income. And he suddenly has 15 animals. And he has a bunch of gizmos, in his farm, a router, a Fitbit, and I see him, fiddling away at this, entering data. Maybe I can do it. He's no different. So then it becomes a big movement in that, particular, farm. So that's what we do. Progressive guys, first mover, transformation, and that's why I said it's a 10-year minimum journey, right? It's not like in urban context, people have passed the basic threshold of technology usage. Right, the little more, and thanks to COVID, people are all on to, and demonetization, people are on to APIs, onto UPIs and all of that. But the village context, they feel, what is this Bangalore company advising me on, right? For my grandfather days, I've been running cows, and here is a smart kid telling me how to run my animals and all that, right? So from that kind of a skepticism to sort of moving to a more scientific way of managing, it just takes that much time.
The business model, to me, I mean, whatever little I've understood, is so complex, right? I mean, you have a B2B component, then you have a B2C component, then you have a B2C component, right? I mean, how does all of this come together? If you could talk about like the pricing structure, and so on, right? So and how do you simplify all of this? How do you, for instance, I mean, how is your team structured in such a way that everyone is like rowing the same direction in order to enable greater revenues for the company?
So every of our revenue stream. So your what you said is absolutely right. So from when you open the bonnet, there's so many moving parts, right? So every of our revenue stream finally maps to these 3 pillars. It's productivity, quality, and traceability, right? Everything is linked to these 3 things. If it's not helping me in either of these 3 things, then I think it's completely orthogonal, right? So for example, when I sell to an FMCG company, which is our primary objective, everything else is ancillary, right?
Everything else is on the supply side, so to speak.
Exactly, right? Because finally my true margin realization is happening on the consumer side. When I step back, the 3 margin pools that we are trying to access, right? One margin pool is on the farmer side, because as the farm productivity improves, farm throughput improves, you're able to collect more amount of good milk from fewer number of farmers. So that gives rise to the first margin pool. The second margin pool is as consumer, if you're willing to pay $1 more for an antibiotic-free paneer or milk or gulab jamun or a fresh cheese, right? That becomes the second margin pool, because I'm able to convince you through an FMCG partner that this paneer is better than anything else that you have. And that becomes the second margin pool. The third margin pool, since I'm taking a platform approach, I'm able to sort of multi-tenant that platform and service multiple FMCG customers. I'm not sort of setting exclusive pipes one for Unilever, one for ITC, one for Amazon Fresh, one for Paperboard. That's not it. It's a multi-tenanted cold chain infrastructure. It's a multi-tenanted processing plant. It's a multi-tenanted procurement network. As a result of which, that gives you, it's a shared platform, right? Infrastructure and component. That gives you the third margin pool. So the idea is to go after these 3 margin pools. And to access it, you need to, at every of these 3 margin pools, you need to solve for productivity, quality, and traceability, or efficiency. Drive more and more efficiency into the network. Multi-tenancy is all about driving more efficiency and improving utilization, right? So a customer like Unilever would pay me on a per liter basis, very broadly, right? If I'm procuring milk at 36 rupees from the farmer, for all the hard work that I'm doing, for ensuring that it's antibiotic free, for ensuring that it's traceable, ensuring that it's also sourced in a very carbon efficient manner, right? They would pay me, let's say, 44 rupees per liter. So I make about 8 rupee per liter as my gross margin. I'm buying it at 36, selling it at 44. So I make 8 rupees per liter, right? And over 1 million liters is a lot of money that we can make, right? Because just to give you a sense, in India consumes about 600 million liters of milk per day, wow, right? And that's 4.5% of our GDP, 600 million. And the 600 million liters of milk is produced by 300 million cattle, and you are about 80 million smallholder dairy farming families. So in terms of sheer headcount, 80 into 4. It's almost the size of US population feeding 1.4 billion people for its daily use of nutrition, right? And more than half of the Indian population does not eat fish or meat. For them, milk is the most important source of protein. About 750 million people only predominantly rely on milk for their proteins. Unlike in the Europe, US, where majority of them eat fish and meat, in India, majority of them don't eat fish or meat. So if an FMCG want to go after the protein requirement of that 1.4 billion people and don't want to understand anything about these 80 million smallholder farmers, they could use a platform, pay us a per liter fee, saying that, look, they'll be making much more because the brand would command that premium, right? We would get about 8 rupee a liter roughly, right? So that's sort of our fundamental approach. In that 8 rupee, I pass on the lion's share to all the stakeholders in the platform. It could be the veterinary doctors, because they're the ones who are trying to make certain things happen. I pass it on to the animal husbandry technicians, because without them, the supply chain won't be successful, right? So the idea is to whatever the FMCG company pays, make sure the good amount of them goes to the other stakeholders, and we keep our piece, right? But that's a gross margin we work with. That's the first and fundamental revenue stream. The second revenue stream, since I'm giving a lot of services to the farmers, it's not like I'm force fitting the farmer the services onto the farmer, right? It's almost like these farmers need multiple things, and I don't want them to go somewhere else and say that I don't have anything to do with Stellapps tomorrow. So they have their asks, right? And one very interesting thing about milk is milk is a daily velocity produce. Every single day, twice a day, farmers come to the collection center, which is not the case in other agri-produce. Like pulses and grains, fruits and vegetables, cereals, grains. You get to see the farmer 3 or 4 times a year, right? That's number one. Number two, I get to see the farmer very hyper-locally in the village, because milk is produced, needs to be collected because of the perishable nature, needs to be collected in the vicinity of the village. Whereas other fruits and vegetables, pulses and grains, cereals, farmers drive up a tractor to the local mandi at the taluka level, right, and then offload it. So you're like several kilometers away from the farmer's house. Here, since I'm very hyper-local in the village, and I see the farmer twice a day, every single day throughout the year, I could actually sell things in a very hyper-local manner. You almost sort of, without having to invest like a Zepto, you can actually become a Zepto to the farmer. You can actually sell inputs, sell services, and in return, I get the loyalty. I get they sort of see that buying milk is just one aspect of it. I'm getting a lot of other services. So we sort of become a Bangalore One for the farmer. You had this Bangalore One concept in Bangalore, right? Where you could go for your railway ticket. Anything you go, my dad used to use it quite a bit. Anything you go, you could go there. It could be your water bills, electricity bills, recharges and anything. Same thing here. Since I see the farmer twice a day, I want to give all those services. And my entire commercial thought process, if I have a fixed cost in the village that is set up to procure milk and interface with the farmer, why don't I leverage the same fixed cost to deliver more services? Because in agriculture, it's to make the unit economics work, you need to leverage your fixed cost beyond just the primary service to multiple other ancillary services. Otherwise, it's not a high ARPU segment, right? So if you say that I'll only make money in trading, I'll only make money with my FMCG customers, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table, right? The best way to run an agri supply chain is to ensure that wherever there's a fixed cost sunk, you monetize a fixed cost across multiple services. It's not easy. You need to cross-skill, you need to upskill. People might argue you don't have focus and all that, right? But we're not trying to launch a spaceship to Mars. It's a relatively simple human, common sense. So if you have the right operational rigor, you can actually use the same fixed cost in terms of personnel, in terms of infrastructure to do more services. You might have one overarching service, right, which gives you 80% of the revenue, but the other small ancillary service would be margin contributors.
The margins have to come from that, right?
Exactly.
Because, I mean, if you're talking about roughly, let's say 15 to 16% margins on the procurement stuff,
exactly,
right, and that is gross margin, and then you have all
the other services
that you have to pay up.
Correct. Each service can contribute a percentage. Imagine if you have 5-6 services, right? Then you're talking about 22%, and from 16 to 22 is a big jump on 1 million liters. Or 1 million farmers and 1 million liters. It's not 6% of 100 crore. It's like 6% extra on a few, 5,000, 6,000 crore. That's a lot of cash flow that you're generating. Right. So one of the things that we learned since you're asking, it's a business model question, right? These very high volume businesses, you need to measure them in terms of cash flows rather than your EBITDA percentages. Right. The EBITDA percentages or the EBIT percentages might look will be very deceptive. You just need to look at how much cash, real hard cash, are you generating on a daily and monthly basis. So that lands up being a very mind-boggling
Any
number.
other changes that you've seen in your business as a result of this kind of a business model? Because again, I would imagine you have to be very, very operationally optimized for something like this. Right. You have to think of other value-added services, be fairly full stack in your solution to the farmer or to the other stakeholders. Any other thing that this kind of a business model imputes to your way of working?
Yeah, absolutely. So, see, fundamentally, the concept is one of vertical integration, right? It's not new to agri. It's just that other industries have used this concept of vertical integration, where once if I have one customer or a consumer, how do I sell more? Right, in the path of that consumer, I don't have to just sell one service, both in the B2B space and in B2C space, right? So in our case, the idea was how do I make this vertical integration work? How do I leverage the same fixed cost to deliver more? So in terms of and if I get it wrong, one service wrongly delivered can eat away the margins generated by all the other services, right? So the idea is to have early warning systems.
Right. So it's it's like you live by the sword, die by the sword kind of situation, right? Which is like, hey, one way of looking at it is I can acquire a user and sell them 8 products. Another way of looking at it is that, hey, one of these services screw up, then all the 7 are gone.
No, you hit the nail on the head, and this happened to us quite a bit. So I'm quite glad you caught it. So for us, the overarching service is buying milk, right, in a very digital manner. So when there is a supply glut and I don't pay the farmer the right price because on the demand side I don't have the right demand, and the farmer would get pissed, and all my other 6 services hanging on the same farmer would fall by the wayside.
Right.
That's exactly what happened, and that's one of the problems you're trying to solve for now.
Right.
How do a tough one, relatively speaking, how do I solve for the supply demand vagaries? How do I move away from a supply forward pricing, so that people don't look at it as milk purchase, to more product backward pricing, where it's governed by 3-year contracts, and it's sort of a consumer minus pricing rather than a supply forward commodity pricing, right? Because commodity pricing cycles are really very vicious. You get caught in a supply glut, and then your entire vertical integration stack collapses, right? Because farmers are pissed off, they churn, I'm not able to pay because on the demand side, I don't have the right price coming from the product. And that's one of the key things that we're doing right now. Exactly as you said, how do I make it more accretive and continue to work rather than it doesn't collapse?
You kind of lock in prices and so on. I'm sure that you must, right? I mean, you might
that's what we do right now.
Contracts and futures.
So one of the way to lock in prices is to convert the raw chilled milk that we procure and all the cold chaining and all the hard work that we do. You convert into value-added products. The minute you convert milk into paneer, it's no more milk, right? Then you price for paneer and not milk. When you convert into cheese, you price for cheese and not. Then the price for a paneer, cheese, dahi, kova, traceable milk, right? People also buy traceable milk, which is milk but not milk, because they're buying it for the traceability and not because it's milk, right? So in those cases, you get governed by the 3-year product backward pricing contracts, rather than the supply forward pricing, where on a supply glut you are beaten down, saying that you might be the best guy in India, best quality, and institutional honest, but then I'll pay you buck more, but that buck more is not good enough for me to absorb my costs that I've deployed. That's the issue with supply forward pricing. So one of the things that we're doing the next 6 to 8 months, and we're building towards an IPO right now, is to ensure that at least 90% of what we do is product backward pricing. 10% risk I can take. It's a portfolio, sort of a play. And this will ensure that my vertically integrated stack is always on a positive spiral. And as you said, it should not collapse. At the minute one of the service, screws up, it could be lending, right? We also lend to these farmers because farmers need capital. Banks don't lend to these farmers because they don't have any prior borrowing history, right? So we have a fintech arm where we actually lend to these farmers. And I keep saying, and the reason I lend to those farmers, only then I can make good quality paneer. Right? Because I can actually, if I lend to the farm and the farm throughput improves, I can actually do antibiotic tests at the farm. So as you can see, why a good quality paneer warrants a fintech division, right? It's when you step back, it looks like unrelated, but the quality of paneer and the fintech need is so tightly integrated into the supply chain. But we need to solve. That's the big problem that we're trying to solve for right now. How do I get from a supply forward pricing to a more stable product backward pricing, so that, as you said, my entire vertical integration stack should not collapse. That's exactly what we're trying to solve for as we speak.
Yeah, no, it's a complex challenge for sure.
Yeah.
So one thing, I have two questions actually. So first is on the financing itself, right? For you to be able to manage your own cash flows must be like heck of a challenge, right? Because I would assume with these FMCG folks or whatever, you have certain credit cycles.
Yeah.
Then you have to pay all the intermediaries in between.
Yeah.
Then you have to pay the farmer.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So your own financing might be like, super complex, right? You might need like financing more regularly than typical, again, like a software tech startup where you raise a bunch of money, plan your 18-month cash burn, and you ramp up or ramp down based on demand, right? It's not so simple as such. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So the good thing and the bad thing about it. Okay, one is initially it needs some capital, but once you start getting into a positive cash flow generation engine, then there's enough cash flowing. Because as I said, milk is bought and sold every single day, right? You can't imagine a more annuity business, right? We bill our customers every 5 days, right? 5 days. And a lot of these customers are like cash and carry. I'd say, like, of course, the larger players would arm twist you and say, I need a 10-day credit cycle, 15-day credit cycle and all that, right? But the max payable receivable gap that we have put in our business plan is 30 days, right? And that's because when you deal with the HoReCa segment, hotel, restaurants and cafes, people like Starbucks or this thing, right?
It is a standard, basically.
Yeah, then cash and carry does not work yet. I mean, we don't have that, kind of a stature where you can say you pay me first.
No, pretty much everyone works on credit cycles.
Yeah. So one of the ways is that we need to deploy cash in 3 areas, right? One is the capex part, where there is an infra component to what we do. There's a cold chain, there's IoT hardware, and there's a bunch of incremental capex that we need to deploy on the processing plant side. We sort of take processing plants on lease, and we OIOfy them so that it can meet the export criteria and all of that, right? But for the OIOfication, there is an incremental capex that is needed. So a good portion of the cash allocation goes towards capex. On the capex, we typically do 1:1 debt equity. It's a very debt-friendly business that way. You don't have to eat up all the money from equity, because all the assets are sweated twice a day, every single day throughout the year. So to that extent, it's not like you set up a warehouse for bananas and only during banana season it's occupied, and then rest of the time it's not there, right? So it's sort of everyday utilization and assets. So capex is one area, capital allocation. 1:1 debt equity. Second is working capital, as you said. We typically follow anywhere between 15 to 30-day working capital. And if our customer portfolio is skewed more in terms of Horeca, then that goes up. We try not to do that. We have a good mix of cash and carry customers. Some would have a 20-day credit cycle, some would have 30 days. But roughly, I think between 20 to 30 days is what our working capital. So we need working capital. For that, we take 80% from debt and 20% from equity. And then there's also cash loss. Cash loss happens because when you're expanding, it's a massive business that you can build. And if you want a very thorough cash generation engine, right, then you need scale. At scale, you get a lot of operating leverages, right? Then you can get more farmers. I can do more lending. I can do more insurance, and I can serve more multi-tenanted customers, and I can be multi-region because Delhi needs paneer as much as Bangalore does, right? In fact, the other way, Delhi consumes more. Similarly, the tier 2, tier 3 cities, even cities like Mysore, Tirupati, and all these places consume enough of dairy. So for us to get enough operating leverage, you need reasonable, scale, and with scale comes some cash loss because when you start, the utilization is not very high. Your procurement network, your cold chain is subutilized. When you're subutilized, you have personnel on the ground and your infrastructure on the ground, there's a cash loss. So typically, when we expand, the new expanded village will have a cash loss for about 6 months. So that needs to be funded, right? The cash loss in an expansion stage. When you stop expanding and stabilize, you don't need that cash loss. So these are the 3 cash loss component where we need to deploy. Majority of it can be deployed, can be funded through capex, through debt, right? So it's sort of that way debt-friendly business. So from an ROE perspective, we can deliver 50 to 60% ROE because the capital that you get through debt, that is sort of helping us grow. So ROC would be anywhere between 30 to 35%, and ROE would be anywhere between 55 to 60%. That we are able to deliver and demonstrate in our unit economics. And it's a very strong cash generation engine. Every day I'm billing, every day I'm getting cash, and hence our focus is in the next 36 months. Can I go to a place where I'm actually generating about 120 crores to 140 crores of annualized EBITDA cash a year? And that gives us confidence that at that scale, we should be able to list, right? Our thumb rule analysis is that if you're between 1,700 to 2,000 crores of top line and able to generate 120 to 140 crores of EBITDA cash, on a percentage basis, it might not look very, glamorous. It will be still about 9 to 10% EBITDA. But the real sheer cash that you're generating and accruing, it's about 120 to 140 crores. And that's something that would, make us, and still we are scratching the surface here, right? We are at a million liters, Roshan, that we would process, we'd be still 1/600th of the market in India. And you're not talking about exports. We're looking at exports also in a big way. Indian diaspora is very big. I don't know if you know, if you take all of the Indians who live outside India, that's about 281 million people. So it's the 4th largest country. You have India, China, US, and then again India in terms of the sheer diaspora, right? So just imagine you're in Dubai or Singapore. If you're able to get desi cow ghee, wouldn't you take it? Because you would, because it's something that you're grown up on, right? So the idea is get to about 1,700 to 2,000 crores of top line, get to about 120, 140 crores of EBITDA, and then list. So the idea is to get to that cash generation engine with the kind of capital allocation that I just mentioned.
A lot of these verticalized marketplaces, right? The typical, where you have a platform matching supply and demand, and you have a software component, and you have financing, and so on and so forth. A lot of these folks have also done their own labels, right? I mean, a very crude example would be, let's say, Nykaa, right? To be able to increase those margins and whatnot. So can we expect like a Stellapps cheese or Stellapps dairy product sometime in the future?
Yeah, very tempting. We think about it, all the time. I think earlier you asked a question, right? Vertically integrated service, so many things that you're doing. One of the things that we need to get it right, I'm not saying we got it perfect, is the sequencing, right? You're tempted to launch, leverage the fixed cost all in one go. And when you try to do that, there's only so much limited management bandwidth. There's only so much you can do. So the idea is, I think the sequencing and prioritization is very, very key. I wish we had got it better than what we have currently, where you need to go after, the cash cow, literally, the first service, right? And then you, at the right time, you unleash the other services. In our case, we might have unleashed far too many too early, and which is what now we're trying to correct. Right now, we're saying, let me step on gas on this service, right, which is the market linkage service to an FMCG company, and then get it hit the ball of the park there, and then where I'm muted, I will amplify it. So I think the sequencing is important. So this part is pretty critical to respond to your question in terms of, at some point, if I'm sitting on enough cash flows, are there places where you can launch your own brand? Possibly yes. Mainly because we see that in tier 1 cities, it's bloodbath for price. You have the Britannia, the ITCs, the Amazon Freshes, the Zomato, the Swiggies, all of them competing to launch their own private brand. But then we were quite surprised to see that people do in tier 2 cities also do spend money to buy good product, right? And I think as the discretionary income keeps going, as the country's GDP start growing, you have enough money to also buy experience. You might actually walk out, even if you are in Mysore, and buy a good ice cream from a corner house or one of those, right? So our thinking is currently, if there is an unaddressed market where the big brands are not really looking at, maybe there is an opportunity, because we know best how to get the right recipes, how to get the right things going. So you may not see it. So right now, one of the things that we do as a step in that direction is something called as House of Brands, wherein there are brands in Bangalore like a Namdari brand or Nilgiri is not that we'd love to talk to them, who are good brands in Bangalore, but for them, dairy is still not a big category. So we're telling them, hey, look, we've been in dairy for about 12.5, 13 years, so we understand all about it. I can actually help you propagate your brand, right? We don't want to own the brand, you own it, but we'll take care of launching it in a big way. Basically. Yeah, because I know all the interesting products that I can do with milk, right? From Pudina chas to and all of that, and I'll help you do it, highly traceable. And I know what will make Bangalore pay for it, because Bangalore likes good products. They pay better for antibiotic free stuff. So I'll tell you what you need to pay. So that's the closest we have gotten to that. But never say never. As I said, it's a matter of sequencing. At some point, you might see Mumak label product in a tier 2 city like Coorg, where come from, or in Tirupati, or in a place where, because Britannia is not focused on that market, and we know how to make the unit economics work. Because if you can make the rural unit economics, farmer-facing unit economics work, maybe I can make the unit economics work in a tier 2 city, right? So I would leave it at that. But yeah, strongly on our radar.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's only natural, right? You're sitting on a ton of data and expertise, right? And and at this point, you're not at the highest margin part of the value chain.
Exactly.
So I think it seems like an eventuality that someday we will have like a Stellapps cheese or a chas. And not to go off on a tangent or anything, but people talk about tier 2, tier 3 cities. Post-COVID, the recovery in these places were faster than tier 1. Right? And if you look at some of the monetization journeys of few of the startups and so on, focused at tier 2, right? Very promising, right? People are paying for content, which is you can't get people in tier 1 to pay for content, right? So I think there is definitely an appetite. There is for anyone who's been to I'm just coming from a wedding in Puri, right? Again, tier 2, tier 3 place. You just look at the amount of money they spend on weddings, for instance, right?
Absolutely.
There's definitely a lot of money there. And I think they're more value conscious. I won't say they're more cost conscious, they're more value conscious.
And another anecdote, okay? So we were, one of our customers in Pune, they wanted us to manufacture gulab jamuns for them, tinned gulab jamuns, and they also had export license, potentially exported. And at some point, they got the demand estimate wrong. They're sitting on, tens of thousands of extra gulab jamun. They said, "Can you guys figure out how to market it?" And the good part is, tin gulab jamuns has a 1-year shelf life, right? So for us, the immediate thought is, I deal with a few million farmers. Let me take it to my farmers. So a lot of skepticism, even among my co-founders, saying, "Hey, look, they're daily subsistence folks, and you're trying to, take gulab jamun," and that just flew off the shelf. Wow. Right, we took it to the village, just sold it at a cost price plus level, because the idea was to recover the cost, not to make a ton of money.
Right.
And in fact, when I visit some of the villages, even in a really remote area like Eastern UP, Chandoli, Chania and all this, one farmer would call me and said, sir, उस दिन आपने एक ये भेजा था गुलाब जामुन, वो अभी नहीं मिल रहा. So you're right. So we sort of write them off very quickly. But as you rightly said, be it Puri or be it Chania, Chandoli, Chania, if people get the right product, the right price and the right value, they do buy it. And we sort of sit here in Bangalore, underestimate, thinking that only Bangalore can buy, whereas they can't, which is sort of not right. Yeah.
So key stakeholder in this entire ecosystem is the cooperatives and the unions and whatnot, right? And I would think that it's not a very easy relationship, right? Because obviously, I mean, there are some political considerations as well, and so on. So how do you operate with these folks? Like, I imagine you work with KMF also, right?
We do.
Nandini, and perhaps an Amul Co-op, etc.
Yeah, we do.
So how do you work with these folks?
Yeah, so the two levels of, it's sort of a love-hate relationship a lot of times, right? So a lot of times we, on the tech side, these cooperatives are our customers. Because the kind of tech that we have developed over the years, we also license it to these cooperatives. So there the analogy is AWS was developed by Amazon to power its commerce. But people like you and I can license it today. People like a competing platform like a Meesho can also license it. Similarly, we have developed our tech platform over the last 2.5 years, 13 years to power our entire supply chain. Right? I like to use the word value chain more than supply chain, mainly because supply chain connotes trading relationship, whereas value chain you're also focused on improving throughput and other things, right? So we developed this entire tech stack to power our own value chain / supply chain. But then we figured that I can amortize the cost of R&D by licensing it to others. So people like Amul, KMF, be it Mysore Milk Union to Kolar Milk Union, there are customers on the tech side. But when we run our own captive supply chain to procure milk, we'll end up also looking at us in a not so friendly manner, because in the same village I'm buying milk, but Kolar Milk Union is also buying milk. They'd say, hey, look, I thought you're my supplier and buying tech, and what are you doing, taking away my farmer? Then we would say, look, aren't you better off focusing on improving your Nandini brand on the consumer side? That's where money is, and we'll power you. But cooperatives don't look at it that way. For them, the farm and the rural...
It's their base.
It's a base, right? So right now their scale is much massive, so we haven't still got into the crossfires. But one of the things that to keep the farmer on our side, we try to give multiple services, right? The Bangalore One concept. Whereas these large cooperatives only have a trading relationship. And that relationship is not always very transparent. These cooperatives are divided into societies, unions, and federations. And finally, the unions who pay to the farmer, their visibility is limited to the society level, which is the local operating entity at the village. The society then is an independent P&L that manages the farmer, right? So the union who disburses the money does not have access and visibility right up to the farmer level. For us, everything is direct, with the farmer. So things tend to be more transparent. They know us, we know them. We, send through our digital connect, send all the messages to them, and to the Bangalore One concept, render multiple, services to them. So even if we are not the biggest paymaster, the highest paymaster in the village, farmers still stick to us because they get multiple other services. And that's really very important, because a large player like an Amul or a Nandini, they have much bigger balance sheet, and they can afford to go below the market rates and all of that, which we can't, right? So we are always not the best paymaster in that village. And farmers still stick to us mainly because they know it's buying milk is one aspect of what we do. There's so many other services that they get, so they sort of stick to us. That's one way in which we try to differentiate. And two, we try not going into areas that has huge amount of government subsidies. For example, Karnataka is one place where Nandini gets a huge amount of government subsidy, which is not true of many other states. about 7 or 8 states in India where the state milk federations receive subsidies from the state government using taxpayers' money to subsidize the farmer. So we try to stay away from the clutches of those districts and those villages because there's enough headroom for growth even otherwise. Just to give you a sense, thanks to the 70 years of work that Amul has done through Dr. Verghese Kurian and all of them, even 25% of our milk is organized. 75% is unorganized. That means if you take a pan-India average, right? If you pick 100 villages, 75 villages will not have organized milk procurement. It's other 25 that is organized. And to get to this 25% has taken 60, 70 years, right? Which is really a good work vis-a-vis fruits and vegetables and others. In fruits and vegetables, less than 5% is organized.
Correct.
Right? Here, 25% is organized, thanks to the pioneering work.
And even when you say organized, I mean, you are talking about like mandis and stuff like that.
Exactly. Right. Here it's proper village level societies and all of that. Right. In other ways, it's in fruits and vegetables, it's just mandi-based systems that are there. So hence, there's enough headroom for us to stay away from these cooperatives because there's enough unorganized patches in a village or in a district that we enter, and to avoid states which is heavily subsidized, and out of the 27 odd states, only 7 of them has that subsidy. And 3, make sure that you don't have to compete only on price. You ensure that it's a platform approach, it's a Bangalore One type of an approach where farmers get multiple services. So that's how we sort of deal with this situation.
So you mentioned prepping for an IPO, right? Sometime in the next 36 months.
Yeah.
What are the various things that goes into prepping for an IPO? I mean, I would imagine improving margins, streamlining your operations, getting the story right? Because obviously pitching it to
the analyst on the ground, on the street needs to get it right.
You need to get all of those things right.
Yeah.
Could you talk about like 2 or 3 things that you're doing in preparation?
Yeah. The first and foremost is, as I said, get more stable margins, right? We should be on sort of a trajectory where margin stabilizes, and every quarter on quarter we should be able to show at least a 50-100 bips improvement in net margins. So that's one fundamental thing that we are working on right now: stable and expand those margins, so that for us the journey doesn't end at listing. Right, the journey is post listing. How do you continue to show robust growth? Right. So the idea is that is one, and 2, from a risk mitigation point of view, have a sort of a portfolio approach, so that, as you said, because of some reason, the HoReCa segment, something happens, or the export channel, something happens. Government says tomorrow bans, saying that all milk banned from India because we need to get protein sufficient first. Right. So you need to have multiple market offtake channels. So it's very tempting to say stay focused on one channel, like the House of Brands or the HoReCa or the contract manufacturing for Britannia. Right, as market offtake, we believe that risk mitigation means you need to have multiple channels, even if at the cost of we having to really stretch and manage those channels. That's in risk mitigation outweighs focus on 1 or 2 channels. So it becomes a portfolio approach. So that's the second thing that we are doing. Third and most important, as you mentioned, that was very perceptive that you caught some of those. You just can't have one service suddenly bleed you to death, right? It has to work, and for that, what we need to do is we need to have early warning systems that quarterly we're able to look at and say, among all the services and cash flows that we're doing, which one is are we doing as planned? If there's a stop loss, when do you pull the trigger on those services? When do you put your foot on the pedal? So that we need to define those early warning systems. Typically focusing on the financial metrics in terms of cost, in terms of people, in terms of efficiency, in terms of if I estimated X working capital, is it really at X working capital? If I estimated 25 days as my payable receivable time, is it really 25 days or is it 30 days? That 5 day or 1 million liters can be a lot of money, right? So developing those early warning systems and dashboards where you're rendering multiple services to multiple stakeholders, because your day-to-day monitoring should be a very simple set of 4-5 levers, right? When you wake up in the morning, I just look at 4 metric, and I should know between yesterday to today, has this metric improved or has it sort of gone down? which is especially true in this milk and dairy kind of a use case, because it's a daily velocity, daily moving part.
Yeah.
I'm not just waiting for March, April for harvest and then September for sowing kind of stuff, right? It's like daily sowing, daily harvesting, daily selling, and daily billing and daily payment to the farmers. So this kind of a early warning system and stop loss mechanism would help, so that you don't realize retrospectively, oh my God, this particular service I've already lost 10 million and my cash reserves are this, and I can't recover those cash losses. And the fourth one is the governance models and reporting systems. That way, I think we've been doing quite all right, relatively speaking. 2.5 years into it, our internal IT systems and all that are in reasonable shape. I wouldn't say in the best of shape. So we get good, pat on the back when some of the investors do a due diligence and say, hey, look, vis-a-vis a traditional startup, some of your system maturities are quite reasonable. But we can't rest on that. I think as we build towards an IPO, these governance models, reporting systems, and tools need to get a little more, well-oiled. It could be an internal ERP. It could be the MISs that we generate, for our investors. Those needs to get a little more well-oiled. So these are the four things that we would focus on as we build towards the IPO.
And again, it could be more of an emotional thing. But why an IPO? Why not stay private for longer? Right? And perhaps accrue more value and list at a much bigger valuation at a later point. Why go IPO relatively early in your journey? Because it seems like in more ways than one, I mean, you're just getting started on your business, right? Why go IPO?
Yeah, so multiple ways to look at it. If you really look at maybe about 4,500 companies listed on our stock exchange. There are only about 25% or about 900 of them who are about 2,000 crores, right? Which means that in 36 months, and do remember, we are building on top of the work that we've done over the last 13 years. So it's not like today I'm able to talk to the head of foods at ITC. Mainly because he recognizes as a player to reckon with over the last 13 years. I have the gumption to talk to the head of nutrition at Unilever. They talk to us because they know in India they have to make a mark in a daily velocity nutrition product. They have to work with us. So the idea is, we've been in the space operationally. It's just that we're just changing the way we're pricing things. We're changing the way we look at milk, not milk as milk, but milk as value-added products. So to that extent, it's about getting some of our acts right, rather than finding a new act to go to IPO, right? And for us, given the volume that we're seeing, like FY23, we ended the financial year at about 300 crores of revenue, and we were EBITDA positive in Q3, Q4 of FY23. FY24, since the focus was more on margins, we'd probably end the year at about 500 crore. And the reason why we only grew 1.5x is mainly because we focus more on margin expansion. Right? Otherwise, we would have been at maybe 700 crores, close to, because we could do a 2x from 300 crore to 2.5x easily. So from a sort of a 500 crore revenue, not even revenue run rate, annualized revenue, to grow to 4x in 3 years to about 2,000 crores, and become, from a top-line perspective, a top 25% of the listed companies, I think is a doable, part. But along the chain, if someone like an Amazon Fresh comes and say, "Hey, look, I would like to acquire you," we'd be open to those, discussions. But we think, given that we'll be at a reasonable scale in the top 25% of the listed companies,
right,
and since we are already at about 500 crores, and we've shown what it takes to go EBITDA positive. The focus is on improve the EBITDA, improve cash flows, and all of that. We think we are in a good place to build from here, towards an IPO. Yeah. If I'm solving for the other, four problems, but it's also a function of the market situation at that point in time. The analyst narrative, as you said, how do I get the analyst narrative? I think, as I said, a digital food value chain platform or a digital dairy is something that people understand. Like in commerce versus e-commerce, right? The E means digital, like a digital dairy or a digital food value chain platform. So that's sort of our thinking, right now, given the scale and given the margins that we are seeing in front of us.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen this with some of the stocks that have listed, tech stocks that have listed as well, right? The IPO journey imputes a certain sense of discipline as well in terms of how a business is run, right? So yeah, there's just a lot more to going IPO than just simply raising capital, of course.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, there's a putting the governance model in place, putting the reporting mechanisms in place, making things less interesting, less innovative, and more boring, right? That's so that it sort of runs like a well-oiled sort of machinery.
More predictable.
More stable, because we guys who are focused on, as you said, how do more innovative, technology-driven folks, we keep trying to tweak on the innovation front. So you need to curb your enthusiasm to further innovate, right? The idea is, can I, when you wake up in the morning, the focus on what not to do rather than what to do, right? So that's what we are attempting to do, build, and you hit the nail on the head, right? It's about discipline, right? How do you get to that discipline to focus on reporting, focus on making things more stable, making things more predictable, which would invariably mean making things more boring. So that's what we're sort of working towards. Our own mindset needs to change. I can't wake up and cowboy style do another one, right? Another interesting thing. It's very tempting because every day you're exposed to so many things. You find something that can get you 3-4% more EBITDA. Then you say, hey, let's sort of do it. But then I know that the minute you touch that, there's some other well-oiled thing that might suffer. So that's sort of the balance. I'm not really good at it. So that's why I need people around me, who would slow me down on some of those things.
The markets impute that, right? I mean, because no matter who you are, right, there's that quarter se quarter tak mentality, right? And they're not very kind to too many of these experiments and whatnot.
Exactly.
Now, your typical startup sensibilities may not augur well with that, right?
Correct.
You might think that, hey, you have to take these risks and you have to do something wild and crazy and innovative. But at the same time, it's a fine balance, right? At the end of the day, to say that, hey, this is a business and you have a responsibility towards your
exactly. You need to convert it into a cash generation machine.
Correct.
To a part of it, right? Other part, you could still continue to innovate, right? So I like the way Amazon goes about it. They keep saying it's day one at Amazon. It's sort of in us as startup founders. You might have experienced it. It's that innovation and doing something new and tinkering away is always there in our blood. So the idea is, as you said, as you quoted Manish Sabrawal, have enough people around you who can slow you down and say, hey, look, let's bore things down and generate cash, and then under the hood you might still continue to innovate. So maybe 5-10% of your bandwidth would be continue to innovate, which would secure your future.
Right.
But your present is all about making things more boring.
Wow, this has been a fascinating conversation. We've uncovered like many nuances, and I certainly can talk plenty more to you about this, right? I mean, it's amazing, but I'm sure that obviously we're like twice over the time budgeted, and
we could probably do an episode too.
Exactly. This is not
unless you shut the door when you find me saying this guy talks too much. So
no, absolutely not. I mean, so this is certainly not the first. I mean, this is not the last conversation we're going to have. I'm sure that we're going to do follow-ups, right? But I want one last response from you, and think of it as a clarion call for entrepreneurs who want to look beyond, let's say, the cool and sexy fintech idea or the SaaS idea. Not to say that, I mean, there aren't, challenging problems or compelling problems to solve in that domain. I am from the SaaS world, right? So, but if you were to talk to those folks who are looking beyond these domains, like fintech, SaaS, consumer, etc., and looking at something like what you're doing, like a verticalized marketplace in an unorganized sector, right? What would your advice to this entrepreneur or wannabe entrepreneur be?
So something that I've realized, right? I wish I had this wisdom when I had much lesser gray hairs. I think a lot of startup success that I've learned over time is on how you sort of execute, right? Not necessarily on the innovativeness of the idea itself, right? And today in this the internet world, in this chat GPT era, LLMs and all of that, ideas are important, but I wouldn't call it dime a dozen, but ideas are there, right? It's if you got the idea today, I might get it 10 days from now. So I think it's about execution, right? If you can focus on not just how do I get something done in a year's time and it has a wow impact, but how do I execute over a 5-year, 10-year window, right? That's, I think, very critical. The importance of execution ahead of innovation, right? Again, I'm not dismissive about innovation or great ideas; they're important, but I think if you're only banking on innovation and great ideas, and execution is not even on your radar, then I think within a year or two, you might have your own bright spots, but it may not be sustainable over a period of time, right? So that's one thing that I've
I think on that point, right? I mean, conventional advice is that you have to build something completely unique that is 10x, 100x better than the status quo. But what I've realized from talking to a lot of folks is that the 10x and 100x, you don't have the perspective to build that on day one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So that's why I think it's about
on day one, you have to just like get in the weeds, like learn up your ecosystem, figure out the market, figure out the stakeholders, and earn the right to build something which is 10x or 100x or 20x or 30x.
Absolutely. So the other way to look at it, Roshan, is that people say 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, 1 in 30, I don't know what's the number, the startups succeed and remaining fail, right? But I think it's the other way to look at it is, I think any idea can be made to succeed if you focus on how to make it successful rather than if it will be successful, right? Correct. It's another way of execution. So it's not about all the ideas that have failed because the ideas were bad. Of course, in some cases it could be, but majority of the cases, I think, you're not going to be hung up on that idea. You're going to continue to tweak it, fine-tune it, take a turn here, pivots and mini pivots, right? What are pivots and mini pivots? You're basically trying to say how to make it sort of work, right? So if you have that means it's execution, right? You're not sort of jumping from, it's not about jumping from one innovative idea to the other. It's about, okay, you had a flash in the pan, you got an idea, and then it's about how do I turn it a little this way, tweak it a little this way. It might take a few years if I do that. So, so that's the other way to look at it. It's execution means several pivots and mini pivots. You may not get it. You may not have your WhatsApp moment all the time. For every idea, there's always a counter idea. But then ideas, you're looking at the predominant parts, right? You're not looking at that 1 in 20 that succeeded. You're also looking at why the other 19 didn't work, right? So that's where the execution comes up. That's where the ability to do the rote, boring work and the notion of compounding and all that sort of kick in. So you're right. So it's a matter of how do you convert a problem into how do I make it successful, rather than whether it will be successful or not.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. I mean, you were talking about like what entrepreneurs should do, right?
Yeah. So execution obviously is on really on top. That's number one. And two, it might sound a little cliched, but give enough time. You might have startups around you hitting the ball out of the park every 2 years, 3 years, but there are certain problems that might fascinate you that might take maybe 10 years to solve, right? Or 7-8 years to solve. It could even be the space tech area. It could be I don't know how long Tesla took before it hit the ball of the park. Even people like Amazon, right? It's not like they hit the ball of the park in 3 years, right? I think they turned a bit positive after 12 years of operations or something. So the idea is give enough time. So when you jump into it, don't jump into it thinking that there is glamour at the other end of the third year, right? It could be no glamour at all, but you have to stick with it for 10 years to sort of make it work. So give enough time, a 3 or 5 year, for someone right out of college at 22, a 3 year looks like a long time, but from a business build out perspective, especially a problem that you're fascinated with and may not be you might be lucky. I wish I was. If you come up with an Angry Birds idea, you're good, right? Within 6 months, if you come up with a TikTok idea, it's good. If you came up with any of those ideas that flew off the ground in 6 months. I didn't want to say crypto, which should have been the case, but there are such ideas as well. But then you're banking on those one-off cases where you get the timing and everything right. You may not get everything right. If you're lucky, you would, and I would want to be one of them as well. But if that's not the case, if you're banking on a cause-effect kind of a scenario where you're putting in enough hard work and you have a reasonable idea, then it's about giving yourself that 10-year window to get to some semblance of a cash generation engine. So execution, give enough sort of time, and I think we touched upon it briefly, don't look at it only from a software point of view. Don't look at it from what is very glamorous point of view. It might involve some hardware, it might involve some mechanical engineering part, it might involve cow and not so fascinating things. But if you're looking at solving the problem, don't just go with something that's very glamorous. You might have to also touch a few things that may not be very glamorous. So I think then you're all set for success.
Stay long enough that you become the right person at the right place with the right
exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
All right. This was like a super enjoyable conversation, Ranjith. Certainly one of the best we've had on the podcast. Thank you so much, for being on the podcast, for sharing your wisdom and inspiring, a lot of people with this.
Likewise.
Hopefully we'll do a conversation 2 and a conversation 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved enjoyed it. I didn't feel like a formal Q&A. It was good. Like, the only thing missing was probably a beer.
Yeah.
Right. And then, chatted. And your questions are very insightful. And I was at times surprised that you're asking, questions that are so, pertinent. Right. So either you've done a lot of homework or you're one of those, geniuses who have, because of sheer experience, are able to ask those right
absolutely
questions.
Not a genius. It's just a matter of experience, I suppose. And I mean, I would love to take credit for all of this, but then, I mean, it's all you, right? I mean, you have all of these nuances that are just so fascinating. I mean, I could really think of another 5-6 things that I want to ask you about, but Part 2, part 3. And all the very best for the IPO journey.
Thank you so much.
I would certainly apply.
Need all the wishes to make it happen.
I would certainly apply whenever you choose to list, and I hope to God I get an allotment. I have terrible luck with the IPOs. As I've said, I've been rejected more times by the IPO market than by any girl.
That's a good one.
So super.
Thanks a ton. Thanks for all the kind words and look forward.
Thanks so much.